Hello, everybody, and welcome to our inaugural LinkedIn event. I'm David Bishop, partner at Brick Meets Click, where I lead our consumer research and retail benchmarking practices. In addition, I have the privilege of supporting retailers and providers like Mercatus in areas of marketing and merchandising, and most extensively in e-commerce. You know, as we look at the business today, e-commerce, as most people know, is a complex, costly, and oftentimes confusing part of the business. However, we can no longer dismiss it, as now it is just a little too big for most people's liking, north of 10% in many cases. So what's the solution? Well, that's the goal for today. Our solution is to help you understand how you can build a stronger, more sustainable and sound e-commerce strategy using the 3 C's framework. I'm joined today with Sylvain Perrier, like the water, CEO and president of Mercatus, as well as his sidekick, Mark Fairhurst, vice president of marketing. Welcome, gentlemen. I am so glad to have you both here today. Sylvain, I'll toss it off to you. I've always loved having our conversations with you. You bring such a refreshing and sometimes surprising perspective. For instance, the inventor of the first dash cart before it was so named the dash cart. So welcome, Sylvain, and glad to have you here.
It's great being here, and I am bubbly, just like the water. And isn't it cool, like we're doing this LinkedIn live event?
You know, it is. You know, who knows what can happen at any moment. We could have history in the making, and it will all be on Mark's shoulders. As Mark, you're going to be moderating this conversation, keeping Sylvain and I on task and on schedule, as I know, we have a lot to cover.
A Herculean task, if there was one, David. So it's good.
Well, no pressure, just your job's on the line.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I can see conversation in the chat already. We encourage everyone to use the chat, ask us questions, provide feedback as we go. Just be aware that there might be a slight delay between the chat and what shows up on the responses here. We may have time for questions during the session. We'll try to get to them. We'll also leave some time at the end to address. We'll aim for about 30 minutes of full-on discussion, and then about 10 to 15 minutes to answer any questions at the end. Just for those who would like to know, a replay of today's event will be available in your feed afterwards, and the slides will be posted on the event page after the event. So, okay, I think I've done my housekeeping bit. So, David, before we jump into the operational strategies framework, can you explain, because I know you have referenced this, if 2020 was the year of acceleration, you have described 2021 as the year of reconciliation in grocery e-commerce. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Cindy, if you wouldn't mind putting up the slide. And thanks to you, Mark. I think I posted that on LinkedIn, and you kind of amplified that was a coining of a phrase that I didn't intend at the time, but it's a compliment nevertheless. So as you look at the chart, specifically the bar charts on the slide, what we're looking at is e-commerce share of total grocery spending in the U.S. And, I think we don't need to dwell on it. Everyone knows the disruption that COVID had on our business in 2020. We can see that rapid and dramatic jump. If we look at August of 2019, which is what we use as our proxy for pre-COVID, because we weren't looking at this every month at the time, to April of 2020, we had this massive jump. It's almost a fourfold increase. We went from, around 6% of total grocery spending online in 2019 to close to 24%, believe it or not. Now, when we look at that, this is across all 3 ways online orders are received by customers. So that's not just home delivery or pickup. It's also going to include the ship to home that most of us would associate with Amazon deliveries on our doorstep. As we look at 2021 year over year, we can see that it's come down. What comes up must come down. We see that. But the point is, it's settled at a really high or elevated level. We're still north of 20%, when we look at total share of wallet. So, as we catch our breath after retailers have rapidly responded extremely well last year to all these capacity-driven constraints, they're now able to go back and look at their strategic plans, well, assuming they have them, and then look at, are those assumptions still true? What were we thinking about the future? Again, we like to say everyone was planning for the future, but no one was prepared to live it. And that's what we had last year. So as we catch our breath, we're going to see that reconciliation this year because, again, e-commerce has grown so large, so fast that you no longer can dismiss or minimize these high cost to serve channels as compared to in store. It's not going away, so we have to address the elephant in the room.
Excellent. Sylvain, do you have anything to add to that at this point?
Yeah, the numbers that David is showing are certainly synonymous with what we're seeing happening in the market, whether it's a Mercatus client or not. I think the reality is the pandemic kind of hit so fast that although we like to think some retailers were planning for the future, I think they just weren't ready for it to just accelerate so quickly overnight. And now we're seeing a lot of retailers that are thinking strategically, what do they need to be focused on for the future? Because depending on where you are geographically in the United States right now, there's some retailers that are not seeing a retreat in the revenue that's been generated online. The mix has changed. And I know we'll get to talk about this a little later on. Like curbside pickup is really taking up steam. So it's quite interesting what we're seeing in the market right now.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going back to reference the slide that was just up. So David, you have a line there going from August 2019, April 20 to April 21. Can you just give us an indication as to what that is driving at?
Yes. So, our ongoing work that Mercatus is a sponsor of, we capture, again, all the ways in which households receive those online orders. Now, keeping in mind, most regional grocers or independent grocers don't play in ship to home, and only a few nationals have aspirations to have their own marketplace. The orange line really reflects the core business that most regional grocers would be in. That's delivery and pickup. So we see directionally the same trends. As you look at that, it today sits at around 16%. So as you look at the relative comparison between those, pre-COVID, delivery and pickup account for under 60% of total e-commerce sales in grocery. Today, it's close to 80%. So you're seeing this shift. And a lot of people don't quite understand why ship to home is diminishing. And it's because as the business accelerated, the roles of those respective channels have evolved. And what someone used to get via ship to home really doesn't make sense anymore now that they have this accessibility to so many other options within the market, whether it's curbside or delivery. So the simple fact is when people look at this, retailers oftentimes will look at that and say, well, we're nowhere close to that number. And that's because this is share of wallet for households. So most retailers will be south of those numbers. However, some are north. So for instance, if you look at Target, their most recent quarter that just ended, they're sitting at 18%. Now that's not just grocery; it's their hard lines, their apparel, and their HBC items. But they're still north of 20%. And again, they're grabbing share of wallet, as are some other retailers. So it becomes somewhat of an opportunity gap, if you will, for how high can we go, or how can we strengthen, and what's the gains for improving the business. Now, Sylvain, I know you have many retail partners and you talk to a lot more retailers out there. How are the trends compared to, what are you seeing or hearing relative to those trends? I know you said some markets haven't receded at all. And at the same time, some of the demand has shifted to curbside. And we've seen that in our monthly surveys, but what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think I am seeing what you're talking about. There is a retreat in certain markets, and in others, it's been fairly consistent in terms of the volume that they're getting. What's fundamentally different, though, is how these retailers historically approached e-commerce. So if they approached it strategically, they've really captured the hearts and the minds of the consumers, and the consumers are sticking to e-commerce. Now, the order frequency is a little less, yet they are going back into the brick and mortar. But for the retailers that just weren't there in terms of being ready, and it was, I hate to use the word check the box type of phenomenon with e-commerce, those are the ones that are seeing to a certain extent a decline in sales. Now luckily, doesn't mean that they're shifting away from the logo or from the brand. They are coming back to in store, but I mean, they still have a lot of work to do on the e-commerce side.
Yeah, and Cindy, if you could put up that slide again. Sorry, we have a magician behind the scenes here. You talked about the strategy, right? At Brick Meets Click, we tend to focus above the dash line. This is where you see strategy to execution on the far right of the screen. And what we're generally hired to do is come in and interrogate, challenge the status quo, challenge the assumptions, and then bring best practices. That's the innovate. And we do that generally around 5-year plans. And we've been engaged over the last 2-3 years with various retailers, some of which, ironically, said all non-essential work, including 5-year strategic plans for e-commerce, were paused during the early onset of the pandemic. Now, totally understand that you have to prioritize what to do. There's urgent and then there's important. And we had a lot of urgent matters at first, but now we got to come back to this. And Mark, you and I, we've talked about this. Traditionally, a provider like Mercatus may have focused below the line on the integration and implementation. And that's only become more important. But at the same time, what's missing is when two different parties don't cross the line between those two, strategy and execution, there are a lot of missed opportunities. So it's a natural focus today when we look at reconciliation is how do we improve that? So, Sylvain, from your standpoint, how has the role, if at all, changed in the way Mercatus is working with retailers or the way you aspire to work with retailers to connect strategy to ultimately better execution?
Yeah, it's significantly changed. And I love that example you're giving, above the line, below the line. And the reality, we would have found ourselves a year ago very much focused around integration, implementation, taking a copy of a strategy and marrying it to the technology. But more so now, we fundamentally work with retailers to understand and to influence strategic direction, their innovation plan, but even more importantly, how are they going to get this to run it and sustain it in the long run to deliver against what they think is a great strategy?
Yeah. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think to add to what Sylvain said, most technology providers are worried about getting the contract signed. And then once the tool is in place, they leave it to their client to figure out how best to utilize. But especially in our experience, retailers, especially when they want to own the experience, they need that access to individuals, a brain trust that really knows how to operate within the grocery technology space. So we've been doubling down in the last few years, really on building out what does that operational strategy look like, and we can go as deep or as narrow as a retailer needs, but we find that it really helps with the value perception of the technology if the retailer understands that they got skin in the game too. They have to be able to execute in order to optimize their investment. So we work hand in hand, and increasingly so as we go forward post-pandemic.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in, I mean, Mark is saying something. The technology will only go so far, right? I mean, it can do X, Y, and Z, but at the end of the day, if there's not something around that, there isn't a strong nucleus around strategy, it's just going to fall flat. And the pandemic for us, what it caused is a difference in conversation. Let's make this less tactical. Yep. Let's talk about where do you want to be as a retailer now that you have people knocking on the door that want to use e-commerce.
Yeah,
and
totally.
And David, I know in our conversations, because we've seen a lot of value in supporting Brick Meets Click in your research, especially to give retailers the signposts they need as they come out of the pandemic. And that's what triggered the conversation between you and I around, okay, how do you execute? We've said the battleground now is execution. So that's prompted where we are landing now on the 3 C's model.
Yeah, so if we go ahead and put the next slide up, please. The 3 C's framework really grew out of a lot of our consulting work with retailers, and we really refined it, Mark, based on the conversation you and I had. And again, keep in mind that we were generally brought in to provide support for the 5-year strategic planning process. The challenge is there, if you look at this slide, there are, so many opportunities. So what's highlighted first right now under ordering connection is profiles, preferences, et cetera. And as you look, the other ones are faded out right now. We'll share those in a little bit. But it kind of overwhelms the retailer or some retailers in terms of where do I start? How do I prioritize and organize my thinking here? And a lot of the work that we were doing was structured around the online ordering process, which in our opinion has 3 distinct stages. There's the ordering stage, right? You go on a platform, you build your cart, you check out. And then there's the assembly process, which generally is invisible or less transparent to the customer. This is, the pick, pack, and assembly activities. And then there's distributing, and that just simply is getting the items from the staging area to the customer. That could be curbside, it could be in store, it could be at the home, it could be via, common or contract carrier. But what we were missing was this cohesive kind of set of strategies that coalesced and helped organize this into some really strategic aspirations, which is what the 3 C's are. They're 3 strategic strategies that aspirationally kind of lay the path for improved profitability going forward. And it really helps organizations understand what's mission critical. So we'll talk about what do we mean by connection, control, and cost. Because with that, now we have a new way of looking at the various opportunities, which are all tactical in execution, and now say, well, are we ready for that? And if not, what do we need to do? What are the requisites for that? So, the framework offers guidance that retailers can then bring into their own planning process. The important point is it's really driven by this motivation to make the e-commerce strategy more sustainable, which means more profitable, and sound, which means it aligns with the way our customers want to shop with us, how we're positioned in the marketplace, and what capabilities we have or are going to have. So we're going to touch on these things. Sylvain or Mark, as you look at this framework, have you utilized something similar to this as you try to work with retailers, or is given the role that so many providers have, whether we're talking pricing or merchandising or e-commerce? A lot of times we end up being task oriented, right? The retailer gives us a request, we fulfill the request, but it's really hard to guide them or influence their thinking.
Yeah, I'll let Sylvain take that.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. The reality is there are elements that we do today that are conducive to the 3 C's. 2 years ago, Mark and I tested the waters with a large regional retailer where we went in and we did persona development because we wanted to understand the consumer and how they use the technology, because it was going to influence the next generation of what we're working on. We've actually now do persona development for all of our clients when we're onboarding them, because we really want to understand the end consumer. And this is much more than just looking at loyalty data. It's fundamentally painting a picture of the people that are going to use this technology. And that's also now influenced customer journey mapping. And what I find, if a retailer hasn't concentrated on some of the other elements here that have an effect on control and cost, the journey mapping just brings up a bunch of questions in terms of, well, how are we going to execute curbside? What does it mean when we do delivery? What do we need to do in store in terms of controlling costs if we're picking multiple orders? And those have now become 2 fundamental exercises that we do with all of the retailers.
Yeah, and we're going to jump over to connection in just a second, but I think ultimately as retailers look at this, and as we've done our work with retailers, we've learned that when we put these recommendations in front of them without the 3 C's, part of that, we realize that we end up quickly at a crossroads where there are barriers in our way that prevent us from moving forward in terms of these 3 areas. Ultimately, what that is overarching understanding how do we conduct our commerce online, which is, what Mercatus does and what many others aspire to do. Well, that's not one of the 3 C's, but ultimately the e-commerce platform that is really kind of the body and engine of the e-commerce business really should facilitate and enable all these things. If it doesn't, then we've identified barriers that we need to first remove in order to actually work against these areas of opportunity.
Right. Before we move on, you okay if we ask a question from the audience?
Sure.
So Michael is asking, which grocery retailer do you think globally has the best strategy and measure in terms of profitability currently?
Well, I'm not going to go so far as globally because Brick Meets Click's area of focus is really North America. So if I said within North America, I would put Target high on that list, if not number 1. And they've been there probably for about 3 years. It's just becoming more apparent in their execution. But again, they've had a lot of those components. With that being said, they're not perfect. They have opportunities to improve, but I would put Target at the top of the list.
Excellent. Sylvain, do you have a perspective?
Yeah, I'm the same, Target, because the rate of innovation they have through the acquisitions that they've made is quite significant. I mean, there are little things they could be doing to improve, and in fact, quite frankly, they have. I mean, David, was it substitutions at one point they weren't allowing at one point in market?
Yeah, they still, even though they have Ship, and Ship allows the very precise substitutions in the case of out of stocks within their first party app for drive up and pick up in store, they haven't enabled that feature. It's a little curious as to why not. And there are issues there because even though they aspire to have real-time inventory, that's still their Achilles heel. So that's an area of opportunity, but I know that they're on it because in the post-shop kind of customer survey interviews, they've asked about it. So they're very cognizant of the issue. They're just prioritizing it according to other opportunities.
Excellent. Okay.
All right.
Let's move forward to the next section, David.
Yeah. So connection. What do we mean by connection? Part of that, sorry, I had something here, is that we really want to own the connection with the customer. The key is that we need to understand where those connections matter most. There are many different points of contact we have and we can talk about. And the real goal or outcome that we're seeking is to strengthen that relationship or bond with that customer, right? They're no longer just a number, they're a name. We know who they are, we know where they live, we know how they want to shop with us, we know their preferences. So we really are much more integral to them than simply a place where someone else fills their grocery order. So as you look at connections, and again, we talked about starting with the user profile, right, to then identifying preferences. Eventually, as you start to use it, you have purchase history. And Sylvain, you touched on personas. These are all elements of connection. There are many others across, assembly and distributing. But if we're just looking at ordering, they're there. And Sylvain, you touched this. A lot of retailers that even I talk to would say, we do that. Check the box, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not so much the issue. It's, what are you using that information for? And more importantly, how can you better leverage that to design and execute a more positive customer experience that ultimately is going to generate more value long term, right? So can you say something about how and where retailers have opportunities to do an even better job, right? With whether it's personas or how they're using the profiles. And just a little throw out there to kind of start it would be, I really love the personalized web page homepages, right? Or other personalization at checkout. But I don't want to taint exactly what you say, but can you speak to where retailers have that opportunity to really leverage these connections to do an even better job with the customer experience and ultimately improve the business?
Yeah, absolutely. So once you've formulated your personas and you do what I call the two most critical steps of journey mapping, which is essentially understanding the goal of a consumer and why they would engage in such a journey, you then get into the fundamentals of understanding what's the trigger, why would they go online? And I think there's this bit of a misconception that people that shop online want to use the flyer. So the jump off point would be the flyer, or the jump off point may be recipes, which when you start to look at the data, that's really not the case. and then they're fundamentally not really well used. What we find, though, is to create that really strong connection. Once you've done those two bits of steps in the exercise I just mentioned, you can get into things like personalization, which is really enhancing that experience and showcase the products that people are potentially going to purchase, which really streamlines the shopping trip, makes it that much easier. But the better part of this, it creates this level of stickiness that consumers are going to come back because they feel like they're being truly catered to.
Yeah, Mark, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this gets to something that I know that you and I have talked about, and Sylvain as well. This notion, if you look at retailers generally, you can divide them between the merchandisers and the marketers, and sometimes they have those roles, in the same individual at the executive level. So can you explain to me the value of personalization from both perspectives?
Yeah, and so when you talk about the merchandiser and marketer, I think part of the nuance was a lot of people are out there saying, we need to own the data. We need to own the data. And I'm not saying that that's not important or valuable, but that's a very near-term merchandising focus, right? How can we monetize our customer traffic? Again, it's important, but it's not mission critical. What we want to have is that connection. We want emotional connection. We want the relationships that we enjoyed when we serviced these customers in the store. We had a name with a face. We knew more than it wasn't simply a transaction, right? It was a relationship. So part of owning the customer is really a focus on the customer. Again, better understanding them so that we can do a better job servicing their needs or wants, and some of which they may not know, but they will appreciate if all of a sudden they see something that they bought in the past or according to your algorithms may be more relevant to them than some advertisement, right? So I just think as we look at this, it's easy to say, yeah, we want to monetize, we want to own the data. That's a subset of owning the customer connection, and it really has to be secondary to why we want to have that connection in the first place.
Super. Sylvain?
Yeah, you said merchandising and marketing. I'm super pro marketing. And what I want to share with the people that are listening right now, historically, we as an organization have not seen a lot of merchants being present as part of the conversation. But that's changing now because this is a profitable avenue to sell product. Fundamentally, e-commerce is about marketing. It's an experience that needs to be managed and led. And that is very critical to get to success.
Yeah. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So we're going to touch on this, Sylvain, and I'll just kind of tease it up. We've had the conversation about organic search before and what it should be versus the way it's been bastardized, right? And this comes to control. Control is the notion that the rationale behind control is that we want to be able to enhance the customer experience in ways that align with our customers, our capabilities, and our strategy. We're all different. We're not all price leaders. So we want to have that ability. So control is about choice. Choice is a central component of strategy, knowing what to do and more importantly, what not to do. So if we can't choose for ourselves what we want to do, meaning something is in our way, then our opportunities are far more limited. And then it goes right back to the very base issue of, are we on the right commerce platform? Because the commerce platform should really be enabling all that for us. And, we talked about ad algorithms before, Sylvain. And if someone wants olive oil, the retailer should choose what the algorithm does. Do they just basically show the ad that had the highest auction bid, or do they highlight private label, or do they highlight something else? But if a brand is called, the brand should be delivered. And what we know, especially on third-party marketplaces, is that the ad algorithm trumps the relevance of the search. And it actually says that we're giving you the results based on relevance, which we know isn't necessarily true and actually counterproductive to creating more seamless, personalized shopping experience. So, and you don't have to talk about organic search, but what other areas, and we could go on and on, are there issues of control where a retailer says, yes, I want to do that, Sylvain. However, my contract doesn't allow that, or my platform doesn't support that. I mean, how do you go about that conversation with retailers? It's not an easy one.
Yeah, no, it's quite frankly, it's one that we're having almost on a weekly basis. And no, I generally start off by saying the principles of organic search have been well established for years now, and consumers' expectations. So if I was online shopping and I specifically put a name of a product or a brand name, that's what I expect to be returned. And I find more often than not that retailers are okay with that. But where it gets a little bit more complicated is if somebody is typing something generic, a generic word, like let's use yogurt, for example. This is where you're going to see retailers want a degree of control. And I wouldn't say bend the rules of organic search, but influence them. So if a retailer has a relationship with a specific CPG, they may want X number of products that are appearing in the search results to be linked back to that CPG. Then it may be they want to influence their private label brand to be a little bit higher. Then they'll go into the organic search. And the reality is, search is not just about creating this organic experience, but it is also giving the configurations and the flexibility back to those retailers to be able to kind of blend this into some of their marketing arrangements that they have.
Yeah, and so just to be clear, you have many clients. So one client may say, well, if it's a generic search, we're going to lead with, in the first position, private label, because we want to emphasize private label. Another retailer may say, no, we really want to put the most relevant thing first, which may be the top seller. But the point is, retailers can choose for themselves how those algorithms work. Is that a fair understanding?
Yeah, it's fair, but also we hold the torch for the consumer, and we want that seamless organic search result to come up and not, overtly bend the rules. But we have that flexibility.
And I know we'll kind of go into the next area, Mark, with cost, but obviously a lot of people are focused on ad sales right now, ad monies, right? I mean, ad monies don't just relate to search. Obviously, there's many other places on the platform that ad monies can contribute to influencing what ultimately is in the basket. So we're not saying ad dollars are in conflict with control, but rather just put in context of how you want to control the customer experience. Is that fair, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just branching off, because we did get another question about search. So Michael is asking, why is there not a grocery aggregator of online prices? If you look at electronics, you see that. You look at apparel, you see that, but not in grocery. You have any thoughts on that, David?
Well, I don't want to say categorically there are price aggregators out there, but there are applications out there that essentially will take the basket of goods that you're shopping and show you the relative value across retail chains of interest. It may not be an exhaustive list, and it may be hodgepodge here and there in the US, but there are some applications that are out there. The UK had those early on. So that type of price discovery is ultimately something that will come commonplace as someone does that, either with the cooperation of retailers or without it, through scraping. So it's just a matter of time in terms of how present that becomes. And then that really is a question of, are you going to win if you compete on price? Well, we know that that's a race to the bottom, that few will win. So, how do you handle that? I think within the broader context, right?
Exactly. And it also speaks to the control issue that a retailer has. Yeah.
So let's go back to the next slide up, which is cost. So as we look at cost, this is driven by the motivation to improve profitability. Well, let me be clear. I say improve profitability. I'm not saying it's profitable. Some people may claim it's profitable on a contribution margin basis or not. We know this is a high cost to serve. Mark, are you typing?
No,
are you typing?
That's my better half.
Okay. That's fine. Live streaming via typing, no worries. This is what happens. So, yeah, I think someone probably just said something about that.
Just for everyone out there, Sylvain's got one of those retro USB keyboards.
That actually sounds like a typewriter.
Oh yeah, I'm envious. Yes.
Oh, very good. Let me try to get my train of thought here again. So cost, as we look at cost, it's about improving profitability. So we look at it a couple ways. There's opportunity costs that we can leverage to increase the amount of dollars that are being spent per transaction, the average order, right? And that lowers our variable cost or our unit, it improves our unit economics because now the cost is a lower percentage of sales. We have variable costs that we can reduce. Enhanced pick and pack is an example of something we want to use in the assembly stage as a way to lower costs by improving our productivities. We can also reduce our cost through alternative revenue streams. We just talked about ad monies, but then there's special charges, there's fees, and then there's even the dreaded price markups, right, on products. The point is, this is what people really want to do to make it sustainable. So it's self-sufficient and ideally more sound in that it aligns with their strategy. But some of the challenges are, I mentioned the price markups. There's some deeply entrenched beliefs. Price parity is one. We want to offer the same price online as in the store because we believe that's important to our customer. We can argue that. And then there's entrenched behaviors, right? The idea that, well, our competitor did that, we need to quickly follow. Imitation is flattering, but it's not strategy, right? So Sylvain, how do you unlock these opportunities? We've seen, just last week, a retailer in Texas dropped their pickup fee on orders over 35. And the question of one of the journalists was rightfully, will we see other retailers follow? The question is, are the other retailers in the same position to act in that way? Or is it something that they better understand and put in context of their own business? How do you handle that? I'm sure you get calls from retailers saying, hey, did you just see the news? So-and-so did this. We need to match.
Right. Yeah. And typically, and that's a great example. And I did get a call soon after that was announced. And my feedback to that one retailer was, are they selling at parity online versus in-store? In this case here, they were selling a little bit more expensive online. What is the snappy BT usage in that state and in the markets where that retailer is? And specifically the retailer I was speaking to, it's actually quite high. I said, great. So they've kind of removed the barrier to allow people that are, using a snappy BT to be able to use that specific retailer services. But fundamentally, when I get these questions, I tend to want to know from the retailer where they are in their maturity curve when it comes to e-commerce, and what have they strategically done to set themselves up for success. An example would be, I have a retailer that does phenomenally well in terms of their pick and pack process, because they now understand that by using Shopper Kit, by using Radius networks, they're actually able to lower their cost and deliver a great ROI and a great service to their customers.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating. For instance, one of the recommendations, and let me, we'll go to the final slide just to kind of throw this up on the screen, because I'm going to kind of just run all over the place and then toss the grenade back. But we've made recommendations to retailers. For instance, this observed trend that is an emerging best practice, shortening the receiving window for pickup from 60 minutes to 30. So one of the recommendations is, evaluate how you can do that. But interrelated with that recommendation are some other activities that have to happen first. The enhanced pick and pack is one example of that need to have that orchestration, coordinating these orders, right, in doing that. But even beyond that, it was the ability to make the change on the platform. One of the things we heard was, we agree with that. Unfortunately, we can't do that within the constructs of the e-commerce platform that we're operating under. So that fundamentally means we have to migrate to another platform. So it just kind of reinforces the interrelatedness of, connection, control, and cost as you kind of throw these things out there. And you talked about the price markups. We have fees now with, dynamic fee structures for some retailers. There is a whole slew of things as you look at the suggestive selling, the shoppable recipes. And then the question is, what do I need to have in place first in order to leverage that? And is that the next step in this path to greater profitability, right? So that's the grenade, Sylvain, unless you're frozen.
Sorry,
there was just pontification without a question. And the point is, there is clearly a lot there, right? And as we even looked at this, would you say we're at eCom Gen 2? Where are we on the maturity curve? I mean, I know we can go back to Web Vantage Gen 1. Where would you say we are right now? Let's just give it a Gen what?
Yeah, I think we are about to enter what I would equate to a fourth generation.
Fourth generation.
Yeah, and if it's okay, let me just give you a reason why. I think historically, and I'm going out on a limb here, this theory still needs to be proved.
This is live. Go for it.
I think that historically we've tried to create a digital environment that was very conducive to how a grocery retailer operates inside a brick and mortar, and tried to jam everything in. Flyers, recipes, shopping lists, I think everything, right? Everything. And when the marketplaces kind of came up with, they said, let's just focus on this and be really good at this. And then you have the large providers that are supporting large US-based retailers in doing only e-commerce and in Canada with very simplified web experiences. So the pandemic comes up, certain things are becoming more delivery, controlling cost, and so on, great experience in the front end. And the reality is, I think this fourth generation is going to take the mishmash of everything I just said and is going to focus on really good and very simple e-commerce experience on mobile and web, tied to strategy, tied to profitable execution. And everything else around that, if it can't deliver within that, is going to be noise.
So that's the edict that you have as marching orders for your team at Mercatus.
I will tell you, we're still researching and we are monitoring user behavior and how they interact with existing controlled by Mercatus and not controlled by Mercatus digital properties to get a really clear sense of that evolution of their mindset.
Yeah, I mean, from a customer standpoint, again, this whole notion of seamless shopping, which is what we can measure and how we can test the strength of someone's omni-channel strategy. And one of the things that, at least for me, and Walmart was an example, they started with 2 apps. And originally they said, well, they're 2 different occasions, 2 different shoppers. Well, we all knew different. Eventually became one. We see Amazon has now, understandably, integrated everyone into one. And as we were talking the other day, and this kind of goes to a question I can see come in, which is from a strategic view, do we see any customer that stops shopping us online as a failure? I would say if I'm the retailer and someone who shopped with me online doesn't shop online with me anymore, but chooses to shop with me in store, no, I don't see that as a failure because I'm still capturing the shared wallet. And we recognize that preferences are dynamic and the conditions are changing where people have more confidence or comfort in shopping the preferred way, right? But one of the things we talked about was, this evolution of focusing more on omni-channel, which is shopping the way you want, where you want, when you want. So the use and utility of that mobile app that you talked about in the store is important as well, not just to e-commerce, but to the store. And that may encourage broader adoption of the mobile app, which could tangentially encourage someone who hasn't, believe it or not, tried to shop online, right? But it's all in the spirit of focusing on how the customer wants to engage with us, when and where, and providing the tools and resources to do that. Is that kind of what you're saying? Mark,
I think
so, in your head.
Yeah, I know. I just like a recent example. We know of a retailer who went all in on a loyalty mobile app with no commerce capability. It's a missed opportunity, and it's sort of putting the cart before the horse, because they're losing that chance to be able to engage the consumer in an online commerce experience that they may be taking elsewhere.
And Sylvain, I'm just thinking about some of your newer prospects who you're talking to. They may have been online like so many others, on a marketplace, right? We know 2017, people made quick choices in terms of how do we respond to this impending perceived threat of Amazon buying Whole Foods. Now, a few years later, they've had the experience under the belt of what it's like to be on the marketplace, what they can, and more importantly, what they can't do. And now they're looking for another solution. And I know you guys are having these conversations. How are those conversations different today? Are they looking at Mercatus and providers like Mercatus differently, more in a consultative way, as opposed to just simply a transaction? We need a platform and you're a provider.
Yeah, it's less of an, if I go back to 2017, you really had to educate the market on the benefits of owning the experience, owning your data, controlling your destiny, marrying the in-store experience with the online experience. And there was a sense of trepidation back there. Is this ever going to be successful? How much money can I make at this? The reality is the marketplace is what has taught them in the pandemic is there is, quote unquote, a sustainable business here. So when they were coming to the table, we're not having to necessarily educate them on the realities of what can be. It's more so, how do you now leverage this and harness this to yourself and properly execute against it, and obviously wrapped in some sort of strategic endeavor.
Yeah. Could we throw up the screen, the slide? And Mark, I know there are maybe some other questions out there in the Ethernet. I can't see those, and I know we just put up our contact information. Is there anything else in queue you want to throw at us?
Yeah, just one last question. For retailers that have shoppable recipes, what sort of conversion are we seeing, or are they seeing for this compared to things like shoppable flyers? I guess that's more a question for Sylvain.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I will say, let me give you some statistics. So shopping list.
Let's go back to the three heads so we can see Sylvain pontificate here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Shopping list, very low usage, 1.6% typically across mobile and web. The other one in terms of recipes, even lower, below 1%. And even if they are shoppable in terms of you can add specific SKUs back out to the cart, back out to the list. We tend to not to use build out those features ourselves. We partner with companies that have that functionality. The third one, which was conversion from a flyer, equally below 1%. I think what's important to understand, what we're seeing is customers that come in from the flyer typically stay with the flyer. Very rare do we see them move from shopping the flyer to building a cart. They tend to be consumers that like to physically go into the store. That's why you can't dismiss the use of a flyer on a website in terms of influencing your brick and mortar. Customers that buy online doesn't mean they're not buying products that are on sale. When they're searching, they can see one brand is on sale versus another. They just tend to be a little less price sensitive. Again, that's from our observation.
Well, I always have said shopping in store is a browsing activity. Shopping online is a buying activity, right? You buy what you want, and there is less impulsivity with that. But now back to that shoppable recipe, are the numbers that you're throwing off the top of your head, amazingly, those are impressive that you could throw those out like that. Kudos. Is that an artifact of what is there today in terms of capabilities, as opposed to someone who's enhanced the process that may result in a different outcome in terms of interaction with something like shoppable recipes?
It could be. I know the numbers because I had to quote them last Friday to a retailer. It could be that the services that exist out there today that actually tie specific SKUs and then are injecting the data into a retailer's cart They may have completely different statistics. But what we see normally is when a consumer wants to bake or cook something, they will go to Google, type in, search for chicken pot pie and get the first recipe. Foodies have their preferred sources that they go to. And when you dig down into that persona, then you start to see where they go. Again, to go to a retailer's website to look at specific recipes, a little less.
Okay.
I think that does it for questions.
Mark, any closing thoughts?
I thought it was a great discussion. I thought we covered the bases well. I think the operational framework makes a lot of sense. And I look forward to providing more insights back to the market in the next few months on what do they really need to do from an execution perspective.
Yeah, and I think from my standpoint at Brick Meets Click, I mean, this work is really exciting. We're all learning. So the more we engage with others, the smarter we all collectively get. I think, like I said in the very beginning, this is a really complex, challenging, and very expensive or costly environment. And, the fact that we have an emerging part of the market that has just rapidly run up over a 12 to 18 month period, we have, the pandemic to thank for that. Now we have the day of reckoning. Like I said, how do we make this more sustainable, more profitable? I know, Mark, you and I, we've talked about filling out the content around the matrix to provide more solutions. Is there anything else you want to add to that, or just more to follow?
More to follow. Keep an eye out on Mercatus.com as well as brickmeetsclick.com. We've got more insights coming out. We have more monthly analyses, as well as interesting results coming in a few months around a more holistic industry perspective. So stay tuned.
Just one thing. First of all, Sylvain, you're a busy guy. I appreciate seeing you again. Like always, you're always enlightening and energetic, and you bring such a great perspective. So first of all, thank you for that. And Mark,
you're welcome. Thank you.
I guess because Sylvain was here, we had to have you here as well, but you did pretty well keeping us on track. Okay. I'm just going to throw out
the opportunity.
Yeah, and job security, I guess. And then just one call out before we leave. I know that you guys have been great partners of ours, working side by side on a variety of thought leadership initiatives. I'm really excited to also announce that starting in June, we're going to start up our sales benchmarking initiative, which we paused during 2020 because of the pandemic, and frankly, no retailer had the time to engage us with that. So we're going to get back to the business of helping retailers answer really critical questions based on facts and figures so that we can provide the insights that serve as evidence for the reasons why we recommend what we do. So with that, Mark and Sylvain from Toronto, Mark.
Before you go,
that was my big closing. Go ahead.
Just a shout out to your team, as well as our team at Mercatus, for all the hard work and effort they put in to put this show on the air.
A consummate Canadian. I couldn't have said it any better myself. So from the offices in Chicago to the offices in Toronto, I'm David Bishop, wishing everyone a great day. Please reach out with questions. Let us know what you think, and we'll go from there. So gentlemen, have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Sylvain.
Thank you.